In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what's a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what draws behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to another episode of Getting Ish. No.
I did the same thing. I did the same thing like 2 weeks ago or something, or a week ago. I did the same mistake.
All right. Okay, we are here. Case closed. Okay,
Case closed. That's right.
Best kept secret on YouTube. All right, yeah, the great weekly panel show coming to you 4 p.m. Eastern time every Sunday. All right, so feel proud that you're here at the ground floor. You can say, yes, I was here before it was the hip thing. I was here before it was the place to be seen every Sunday on YouTube. Okay, and today we have a very important and interesting topic that we're going to dissect today. Now, we've had some mass shootings that have been publicized. Okay, now these are not the only mass shootings that we've had. I believe we've had 27 mass shootings this year. With mass shootings meaning more than one person involved, more than one victim. It doesn't have to be a homicide or a double homicide or anything, but if there's a shooting where more than one person is targeted, that kind of deal. And as you can imagine, that's going on all across America all the time. We've had some recent ones that have been publicized, and the resulting conversations on YouTube and on Clubhouse is a familiar one. Okay, familiar conversations about gun control, familiar conversations about what exactly is the root cause of this. What is the gun culture in America? What does that even mean? The gun culture, that is, and what could be the solutions? Okay, if we have a good problem statement as to what the problem is, then maybe we can have some solutions. And people vary in terms of how they state the problem, from, shall we say, mental illness to, well, we should be doing background checks and gun shows, and it's all about these people. It's all about the background checks and whatnot, all the way down to, well, we need to put military in the schools to protect our children and whatnot. Or arm the teachers and the principals, or have armed personnel in there. So that's what we're going to be breaking down today. Let's go ahead and click that like button, click the subscribe button, and the notification bell, ladies and gentlemen. Go ahead and respond to the poll. Go ahead and leave a comment. Go ahead and participate in the chat, as we are going to have a lively conversation. Right now, so far, it's just me and Dr. Thunder starting out, but we expect more to trickle in as we continue the conversation. Now, let's start simple, right? Let's start simple. And by that, I mean, what's our relationship here with guns? Dr. Thunder, do you now, or have you ever owned a gun, or do you plan to own a gun in the future? What is your relationship with gun ownership?
Yeah, I've owned several guns. I currently own guns. I've got a .357 Magnum, and I can shoot 38s. I can shoot 38 specials. And of course, I can shoot 357 Magnums. It's it's full of hollow points right now, and yeah, it's in my house. I also have a 20 gauge pump shotgun, and the beauty of a pump 20 gauge shotgun is that it has a rather ominous sound. When you hear it cock, um, everybody knows what that sound is. So in the middle of the night, somebody decides they want to try to test to see if my house is a good one to try to enter. When they hear that chink chink, yeah, when they hear that sound, they know that's not a good. They're not in the right house. And I grew up with guns. I grew up in the country, so and the way that we were socialized around guns was my dad at a young age. He taught us the seriousness of guns. He said, never point this at anybody, never, you know, this is the business end. This is how this works. He demystified it. He made it less sort of, oh, this is a taboo, a thing that, let's try to see what this is about. Let's see, this is a toy, No, he took that all out because at a young age, he had us shooting, archery and guns. We cleaned the gun. We respected the gun. I grew up in the country, and most folks out in the country have guns. And what's interesting is all of this talk about having guns in your house and that causing more likelihood to get shot and all like this. There was never any of that kind of stuff. No accidental shootings or any of that kind of stuff in my community. Never. And the reason is because everyone respected guns. They knew that they were serious. They had been exposed to them very early, and they all had experience shooting them. They understood the damage that guns can do, right? So yeah, never any issues with that. All of this crying for more gun control is ridiculous because, as the old saying goes, and this is something we hear all the time, guns don't shoot people, people shoot people, right? So part of it is a safety issue. Make sure that you're educated around guns. You understand what's going on. The second thing is that we need to enforce the laws that we currently have. There are laws in the books that prevent criminals from having guns that are supposed to, if we would enforce them. There's no need for any additional laws, right? It's just let's enforce the ones that we already have. And really the issue now is there's an epidemic of mental health issues. And I'll stop there because I could talk at length on this topic, but I have guns. I have had guns. I've been exposed to guns at a very young age. My dad taught us about guns when we were very young, and the guns in our house were both loaded and not locked up. That's another thing. They were loaded and not locked up. We knew exactly where they were. We knew they were loaded. None of us had, I mean, I have 3 other siblings. Of course, my parents are still together, 52 years. Shout out to them. And I think that has something to do with it also, family structure. But we'll one thing at a time.
One thing at a time, indeed. So I just asked, what is your relationship to gun ownership? And I'll take that as that one answer there, which is yes, 38 special, the Magnum, the this, the that, the shotgun, hollow points in your house. You grew up in a rural setting, and you have the guns loaded and not locked up. And from a young age, you were told that this is in the serious category. This is not toys, blah, blah, blah. And this is not, so perhaps you've assuaged the fears of people whom are not used to that, let's say, rural lifestyle, whom are not used to the fact that kids can be around guns and handle them safely. And if we can all agree that that is a possibility, okay, number one, and that two, it does happen in these areas. And you pointed out that these are areas where there's not a lot of gun violence going on, right, in these rural areas. But then there's still the question of why or what can be done. Let's not ask why, because people the wise people, you know, asking why people do stuff is you know is silly, right? Because we know the answer already. Like we know all the answers because people are messed up, including ourselves. Now you mentioned the enforcement of certain laws, so let's go there. Are you saying that there is because you're saying enforce the laws you have? Is what you're saying? Okay, the laws are enough. Okay, or are you saying that due to some laws not being enforced properly, there, in other words, do we have some gaps in the enforcement still that might solve some of these problems? And if so, what are those in your mind, right? Because one could just say, well, I think the laws are fine, right? Right now, the laws for jaywalking are fine. The laws against for assault are fine. You know, like people, if you know, there's no need to, for more additional laws. Is that all you're saying, or you're saying that there's some gaps there with some laws that need to be
Yeah.
further
So
enforced?
okay, so one of the things that has been discussed in these conversations ad nauseum is so-called assault weapons, assault guns. Okay, now this is a made-up term by leftists to obscure a real discussion about guns. Okay, so for instance, an AR-15 is by leftists called an assault gun or an assault weapon. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but they're wrong. Assault weapons are automatic weapons. In other words, you squeeze the trigger and it will continue to shoot until you stop squeezing the trigger. Or sometimes it'll shoot in bursts. So you squeeze the trigger and it'll shoot 3 or 5 rounds or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
An AR-15 is semi-automatic. Semi-automatic. That means one pull of the trigger, one bullet. Okay, but you don't have to cock the gun. When you shoot the gun, it also loads the next round. Okay, it uses the it's physics, right? It uses the
recoil.
The recoil. Well, the recoil, the backfire from the gun, I suppose, it uses that to load in the next round. Okay. Now, notice that a lot of this gun control stuff circulates around these supposed assault weapons, when actually handguns are the things that are actually most responsible for deaths around the country. Handguns, okay? And notice that they don't call even semi-automatic handguns, they don't call them assault weapons, assault guns.
So hold on a second. Are you saying the emphasis should now be on handguns? Is that what? Because the question there is, what are the laws that need to be enforced? You're mentioning correctly that there's a whole propaganda machine going on there. But before we continue, let's address a couple of super chats here.
Sure.
Shout out. Okay, thank you very much for the support to. Is that Dom Key 90? Okay.
Don McKee 90 with the $2 super chat. Every old guy has a Corvette and a 38 special. And
right,
then we've
Dr.
got a
Cut.
$10 super chat that came through. Let's talk about that. Let's see. What is it? JJO 4040 with a $10 super chat. USA's don't trust the government because they see the way they mistreat people. And right, I could mistreat black people, and whites get away with criminal walk free and live next door. So we must protect them. We must protect. I think ourselves as police aren't obligated to. Recently I was watching a show on Dr. T. Hassan Johnson's channel. Shout out to him. And that show was about so he had, I guess, the founder of NAGA, National African American Gun Association. Okay, and there is a history of certain white folks, that reside on a certain political side of the spectrum that may actually have some additional K's associated. Anyhow, trying to eliminate ownership for black folks that have guns. And if it wasn't for the fact that early African Americans, especially after slavery ended, owning guns to be able to protect themselves, there would have been no sort of protection. White folks just come in the middle of the night, decide that they want to, EPAR your wife. They want to come in and EPAR your daughter. They want to come in and pistol whip you, whatever. They would just be free to do that. And so black folks, smart ones, owned guns. They owned guns because they needed to protect themselves from those that didn't seem to be impeded by police. Police were not protecting us. We had to protect ourselves, right? But anyhow, NAGA is, folks can go and check that out. National, I think, African American Gun Association. That's what that is. And
we'll get to a point where
you can get all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
We'll get to a point where we're going to try to list out or consolidate the legitimate reasons for owning the gun. You've already mentioned about, you're owning a gun for protecting your family. That's perfectly understandable, right?
Yes.
And then you mentioned the rural aspect, which is almost like a lifestyle. Rural ranching or hunting, that whole group there, of which then the question becomes about, or shall I say, because of the differences in lifestyle, hence decisions need to be generally localized, okay, in the sense that what's good for Baltimore is not necessarily the same thing that should be prescribed for rural Ohio, right? Because these are just very different types of lifestyle, very different problems. People got acres of land and, neighbors are far, all that kind of stuff. It's a very different.
Yeah, you can't discharge a weapon lawfully in city limits. So that'd be one of those kinds of laws. You have to be out in the country, as it were.
Let's go back to the laws, because you talked about the propaganda in terms of calling something an assault weapon, or just using the term AR-15. AR-15, it's a good, catchy name, and it's good for scaring people too, right? AR-15 in many, many rap songs and also in many Senate hearings comes up all the time. And you're saying, hey, there are laws that need to be enforced on the books. There's a comment right now that talks about, access to legal weapons. Take, for example, at gun shows, you can get a gun without doing a background check. And so let's talk about the additional legal restraints, or perhaps the laws that should be emphasized. You started by talking about the handguns, okay, which are the source of a lot of the violence that you're talking about. Is there something about the laws associated with handguns that perhaps should be emphasized? And and obviously you're relating with the obsession with AR-15s, right? And quote unquote assault weapons. Now there's a lot on the table there, but we can pick it up piece by piece. But the general point here is the legal structure. What should be enforced?
Okay, so for instance, criminals are not supposed to have guns, and there's something that occurs frequently called straw buying, right? Mm-hmm. So what a straw buyer is that a person that doesn't have any issue with the law goes and acquires a gun, and then they give it to somebody or sell it to somebody that doesn't is not lawfully supposed to have a gun, right? And actually, in the case of what was the situation? This was a few years ago with the guy going in and shooting up folks in a church.
Dylan Roof.
Yeah. So Dylan Roof. So to my knowledge, Roof actually was not allowed to own a gun. But what he did was he found somebody that would straw buy the guns that he wanted. And now that guy was located that sold him the gun, and that guy's in prison. Okay. So the other thing is this so-called gun show loophole. To my knowledge, I think that there's been some reform with respect to the ability to just get a gun without having done a background check because it's a gun show. However, there are background checks that are conducted. So, but here's the primary issue, though. The primary issue is that no matter how many laws you have, even if you perfectly you're doing all of the stuff, you're following the law, you're prosecuting folks to the full extent, and anytime any of this kind of stuff goes down, any kind of crime goes down around illegal firearms, okay, you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do, you're doing background checks, everything else. The problem is that criminals, by definition, don't follow the law. So essentially what more laws do is create more hindrance from law-abiding citizens to get guns, while making it not any more difficult at all for criminals to get guns. So any additional laws are not going to do anything about the gun problem.
Let me ask, because this is a legitimate thing. It is legitimate to ask, what about the difference between America and Europe? Now, I know immediately that the only difference between America and Europe is not laws. That's the first thing to be said, right?
Right.
Because Falcon Black pointed out, hey, these things tend not to happen in Europe, and you may say, I wonder why not. But you immediately recognize that, hey, America and Europe, the differences are not just laws. Okay, hence it becomes. It's one of those things where unless you have another America, okay, I'm just speaking now empirically you want to do a double-blind test, right? Unless you have another America, in other words, another continental nation, okay, that has this history of gun ownership, okay, with the massive population and the great diversity, rural, urban, all this kinds of stuff, and then you have different laws over there, and then you do a test, okay, then you're comparing apples and oranges. But perhaps we could say some of the differences, like there definitely is a great deal of cultural differences between America and Europe with regards to the whole history of guns. You mentioned whether it be amongst white people or amongst the African Americans, they've had many reasons for why they want to hold on to their gun. But let me ask this: is the whole deterrent against government tyranny a legitimate reason? Or is it just more like a cultural artifact? It's just kind of like this is kind of what we do. The gun is kind of like the flag in that regard. It's like, you can't take the guns away because it's a symbol of whom we are. Does that wash with you? For that, or you don't? Yeah, go ahead. Comment on that particular one.
Okay, so you have those that argue that, for instance, you've got your guns, but the government really wants to take you over. They have tanks, right? So you may think that you're supposedly protecting yourself from the government, but if they really want to do something to you, they can do it, right? Now, I think there's somewhat of a problem with this thought, okay? Because there's like, what is it, like something like 300 million guns in the United States. All right. And I think that it at least is going to provide some sort of deterrent from the government just going willy-nilly and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, like in mass, right? Yeah, they can do their covert stuff. They can do their black ops stuff, and the dude one guy disappears. They can do that. But if they, for instance, were going to be like, you know what, we're doing gun confiscation. That's what we're doing now. I think that would not work in America, because I think that there are too many folks that are not going to relinquish their weapons. And there's not really a solution for that. There's not really, I mean, they can't really go in and get all of the guns. You're going to create way more issues than you would otherwise. There's been some of these gun buyback, programs, which essentially still is basically them trying to confiscate your weapon, so they're going to buy it back. But if you don't sell it to them, then you're doing something illegal, right? So here's a little bit of money. We want you to feel a little bit better about this. But really, it's the same. It's kind of like greasing the wheel, like, we'll give you a little bit of cash. But that's the same sort of thing. But the reason that stuff would not work in mass is because there are too many guns, right? And there are powerful lobbies. The what is it? National. What is it? You know what I'm trying to call?
NRA.
Yeah, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, for instance, who early on was a great ally of Black people.
Okay,
great
let's get down. Let's get down to this. To brass tacks here. You mentioned there are too many guns, right? And they will not be taken away. In some people's minds, that's the problem. So in some people's minds, the problems are still guns. You still haven't convinced them, Dr. Thunder. You've said self-protection is needed. You've talked about the fact that, hey, the smart freed slaves, it was a good thing for them to have guns. But you don't just have to be a slave in order to realize that you need to protect your family, right? But the whole slave thing makes it such that one can immediately see a clear enemy that is not necessarily your typical criminal that's coming to rob you, but somebody else whom hates you for other reasons, hence you need to protect yourself. You talk about the rural lifestyle, and you even said that, hey, within the rural lifestyle, there is that's not where the problem is, right? And that there is respect for guns over there with the hunting and the ranching and all that kind of stuff. And I would then agree, and I hope people would agree, that look, what's good for rural Nebraska is not the same thing that should be implemented in San Francisco, right? Like, and if you think that it should be kind of uniform like that, I think you need to rethink, okay? Because that is almost
a lot of these hard left folks in just totally anti-gun things. They one size fits all. Nobody should have guns.
One size fits all, definitely.
Only maybe policemen. Let's go to like Europe, where places in Europe where the police don't even have guns. So then they can, when they see an assailant, a perp, they can say stop, or I'll say stop again.
Now, the thing is, one size fits all is always an emotional response, right? In other words, there's no other area in which there is complexity and diversity where you just go in one size fits all, top down, uniform. It's always crazy. It's fragile. It misses everything. There's no feed. All the problems that we have with centralization. Okay, and when you see it in the, let's say, Communist Party, you clearly understand the problems with centralization. When you see it in dictatorships and authoritarian rule, you understand the problem with centralization, right? Hence, you need to kind of fit the cloth with the situation. But fine. So we're saying we're going to leave the rural people alone, because I think that that's a key thing for people to understand. We need to respect people's lifestyle, especially when these are not the people shooting you. Okay, respect people's lifestyle, and also even if the people whom, shall we say, use the gun as a flag, I also kind of, symbols are fine to me, right? And if you're like, hey, this is America, this is how we roll, fine, okay. I don't think, oh, it's so kind of, it's harsh and it's toxic masculinity adjacent. It's like I'm fine with that kind of symbol. Um, if we are now going to take a sidestep from the guns and let's talk about the people for a second, okay? What exactly is going on with the mental health picture? Because I know it comes up from time to time. It's kind of a cliche, okay? If we say mental health, is that a real thing, or is it just an excuse by gun advocates to say, look, these people have? It's because you're giving boys Ritalin, and you're not allowing them to, be their masculine selves or whatever, or it could be economic things. Okay, people are not, this is a generation whereby they can expect on average to do less well than previous generations. You could talk about incels and all these other things, which then begin to get into the mind state, uh, the mental health of the body polity, if you will, all the way down to just downright crazy. Okay, what is that a good place to start looking for solutions? Now, obviously, these are going to be long-term solutions. It's going to be like broad, sweeping types of changes that need to happen in order to address it. But what do you have to say about the whole mental health picture?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, right? I think people are using that as a sort of convenient distraction, right? Um, that is true. Uh, but I would also say that it is the case that we have. Look, we live in a free society, an open society, where, look, I mean, if you want freedom, then there's risks in association with freedom. The only solution that really is going to protect everyone is if you take away people's rights, if you control, right? So if you say, okay, now we're going to be really restrictive and oppressive, but then the question always is, who gets to decide whose version of restrictive and repressive, whose idea of control, and who is doing the controlling? That's critical, and that's one of the reasons why uh you know it's such a challenging sort of issue. Mental health is a significant problem. It already was an issue. It probably is worse now, and we have more guns, and we're still, a like I said, an open society. And then you have social media and all of these other ways where it is much less difficult for you know uh, a nefarious character to so-called radicalize a number of folks that already are predisposed to a certain kind of, there's a reason why, um and they've done actually studies on this, and but there's a mental health epidemic in the Middle East. And you couple that with these, these terrorist organizations, and their, you know, effective, quite effective strategy at getting, especially young men, to strap a bomb to themselves and run into, a crowded location, right? So if you have people that already have these uh, conditions, these uh, mental conditions, and you are exploiting that, you're taking advantage of that to deal with. See, yeah. So you have all these issues. I interviewed Pastor Joel Brooks, and this is the second time I interviewed him. Really great interview. Go and check it out. It was episode 201 in Conversations with Dr. Thunder. And in that interview, he said something I thought was quite interesting. He said that notice that God did not childproof the Garden of Eden. He did not childproof the Garden of Eden. And what he had expounded on that connection with other people at your own pace, under your own conditions, requires risk. There is a risk that is involved in interacting with people, right? And it's yeah, we're talking about dangerous weapons, right? I understand that. You know, when there's actually more gun ownership and training, there's actually less issues.
Okay,
right?
so you've put a lot on the table there. Okay.
Yeah.
You on the two kind of signposts there still to keep us aligned is the mental health thing, which by the way is not going to address everybody because you're just going to have evil, right? And evil people and bad guys. If I went psycho tomorrow, okay, and I wanted to get guns and kill a whole bunch of people, there's hardly anything you can do to stop me, right? Like, you know, it's going to be difficult, even if there are all kinds of laws that are out there. So that's one aspect. And it may be the case. We need to completely admit, right, and be fine with the fact that you will only be able to punish some people and never stop them, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's just is what it is. Okay, some people you can't stop them. You're just gonna have to have strong laws that perhaps deter a particular percentage, but some you're just gonna have to catch them and then maybe put them away forever or kill them, whatever it may be. Then you have the mental health thing. As you mentioned radicalization of people, okay? And also there's a whole kind of big slew of kind of us not handling our mental health challenges, okay? Someone is mentioning that, they're mentally ill people in Europe, but they have a system for dealing with it, okay?
Yep.
In America, it's in the streets, homelessness, and it hence becomes a police problem. And the police they're not built to handle mental health issues. So people, you have these cities busing their mentally ill people to other cities and dumping them there. You have people, you have cities busing these homeless people and just dumping them in hospitals, right? And then from the hospitals to the jail, from the jail to the streets. It's just kind of like, that's the cycle of mental illness when it gets that bad, right? And now let's talk about the social media aspect, okay? It branches off a little from the mental health thing. I want to talk about the fact that it's easy to get clout because we do know that when shootings are publicized, okay, it does encourage other people to do the same. Because if you're the type of person that wants to be famous, you don't care about whether the fact that whether you live or die, but you want to go out with a bang, maybe, okay? You want to go out with a splash, or you have a particular point to prove. Then it doesn't help if the media, forget social media now, doesn't help if the media goes out there, says your name, puts your picture on there, makes you famous, right? And then you can live the rest of your life as the late Charles Manson did, right? Just super famous, okay? You got mad clout, if you will. Social media has increased that as well, in the sense that now not only is it the case that media needs to, media is putting your name out there, but you can get a lot of clout with social media. So we see maybe on a smaller scale, because again, there have been 27 mass shootings. Okay, we're talking about two that are publicized right now, but there's been 27 so far. I believe we've not had 27 weeks in the year. I don't think so. We're not halfway. Yeah. We're not halfway through the year.
Yeah,
yet.
we're not halfway yet. Yeah.
We're not halfway through the year. We've had 27 shootings. Okay, and a lot of those are the kinds that you see. Oh, somebody shot up a spot while going live on Instagram, right? And we know we've heard of those kinds of things. Maybe sometimes
Yeah.
you hear about it because some kind of rapper was involved or something like that. But you have people showing guns and doing these kinds of things and maybe shooting people for the whole clout thing. What can be done? Because again, this is the United States. You mentioned Garden of Eden. You mentioned freedom, and there's a price for it. Okay, there's a country song. Freedom isn't free, but there's a hefty fucking fee. Sorry for the customer, but I had to do it. It was an artistic license. But okay, so we understand that. But what can be done on this end? Okay, on the end of clout, on the end of media, we could tell media to not publicize the names, for example. But what can be done about social media and the fact that people who want to get clout there by shooting people can do that? Is there any kind of restriction that would be worthwhile or anything that you can think of?
Yeah. Yeah, you stole one of the things I was about to say, and that is we need to start refusing to use the names of these whack jobs. Because I think that would, if we did it across the board, that would reduce the sort of I'm doing this so that I can get fame. You know, nobody paid attention to me in my life. They're going to pay attention to me now. You know, that kind of thing. Another thing is, and I said this before, what is it like is it the Netherlands or is it Norway or something where everyone is required to have a, like an AR-15 or something, and they all have to have training. It's like 95% of the population are strapped, and they have little to no issues with any of this kind of stuff because everybody is strapped. You know, it's, part of the issue is, and this is an issue with this so-called gun-free zones. See, an issue with a gun-free zone is that nobody has a gun. So if you're a whack job, you can go in and you can do a lot of damage without risking damage being done to you, right? And in these situations where these these folks go in and shoot up elementary schools and stuff and go into churches and stuff like that, those are gun-free zones, right? Now, that I don't think that's not a coincidence that a disproportionate number of these these atrocities take place in these so-called gun-free zones, right? So here are a couple of my ideas with respect to protecting better our kids and just people in general, right? So one is do away with this gun-free zone goofiness. Okay, it's totally ridiculous. All that does is announce. It's like putting a big neon sign on saying to wackos, here is an easy place that you're not going to be, there's going to be no retaliation if you come here. Okay. And what you do is single point of access in schools, single point of access. You put in metal detectors, and you have assigned security personnel that have guns, and then you train somewhere between 3 and 5 teachers. It's elective. They don't have to do it. They would volunteer to do this, but at all times, those teachers, they would be strapped. Hey, that's what it is. This is about protecting our kids. Folks, sometimes their pushback is, well, I don't want my kid to have to go to a school like it's a war zone. It's like, look, it's already
a war zone. We're getting smoked. You're talking about you don't want to see guns around. Well, I understand the reaction, but it's an emotional one that doesn't actually have any material thing to say about the issue. All you're saying is you don't feel good about it. Growing up in Africa, for example, okay, you guys may have seen pictures of, just like somebody walking down the street, like, the military or the police or whatever, or the airport, just AK-47s everywhere, right? So
Yep.
growing up in that situation,
And those were probably the actual machine gun versions. Those were probably actually our assault weapons.
exactly. So I can understand though why somebody may say, but that's kind of it's crazy, it's cringe. I don't want to see that in my streets. But it doesn't. You'll get used to it, just like like a club that they carry or a taser. Okay, you'll get used to it. So I think that arming the 3 to 5, or let's just say, I don't know what the 3 to 5 equates to you, how many teachers are in that school that you're thinking about, but let's say, what is that, 5% or 2% or something like that of the teachers in a particular school who are volunteering, and they're very well trained, and maybe you have some retired police officers and retired, shall we say, military people that are armed guarding the school. These are the people that you would hire. Okay, or you can hire, Blackwater or these other private. We do a lot of private warfare, right? And we got a lot of private warfare. We got a lot of private intelligence. These are contractors, right? So why not deploy that? And if you have any kind of inklings as to, well, this should not be that way, well, then you just need to relax and drink some wine or something, because saying something should not be that way is never. Those are like famous last words, as they say, right? It shouldn't be that way. Boom, you get your head blown out, right? So
right.
so far, I can kind of see where you're going there, but let me try to re-enumerate what you said. You're saying, you're not done listening them out. Real quick. Go ahead.
Here, let me say something real quick, because what is it? Snapshots Reviews, who's taken a lot of issues with stuff that I'm saying, says that training teachers to potentially have to shoot a student is ridiculous. Okay, well, let the student just shoot the teacher and a few more students in the class then. And then let's see, single point of access. Actually, if I said access, what I meant is single point of entry. Of course, you would be able to get out of the building because it would be a violation of fire code. And of course, you didn't say anything about the metal detectors, the security personnel, and that would be far more effective than in the case of this latest thing that happened. If you had just those couple things that I said in place, if you had just those couple things that I said in place, instead of 19 kids getting killed, I think you significantly reduce that number, and maybe you're in a situation where nobody dies except for the assailant. So to just say, okay, well, training teachers to have to shoot potentially shoot a student. Yeah, if that student is trying to shoot you, that's better.
Yeah.
The student shoot other folks just because they're a student in this scenario. That shouldn't be the thing that prevents them from getting taken out if they're trying to take out other kids.
Yeah, every once in a while, because we are civilization, and the thin veneer of civilization over these decades, and in our lives, we're born into civilization. We kind of see civilization. It blinds us to certain realities. Okay, and every once in a while, you got to remember, okay, how ruthless apes are. Okay, and that we're top ape on this planet, not because we're little fluffy rabbits. In other words, this is still the jungle.
Yeah.
Lest you forget. Okay, this is the jungle, and we dominated the jungle. So everyone around you right now, looking and talking, these are crazy animals, including myself. Okay, so saying, hey, why should I have to train a teacher to potentially subdue some crazy animal from doing some certain things? You're like, yeah, that's what it makes sense. That's why you have the darts in the zoo, to stop the crazy animals. And you're talking about the top animal on this damn planet. Okay,
yeah.
We're not fluffy rabbits. Go ahead.
Can you put the last two comments, Rob Calico and Snapshots? Put Rob Calico up first.
Okay. Rob Calico. Well, the previous one.
No, the latest one, the previous one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think students can't take the teacher's gun? Really? That's your pushback?
So the point is, okay.
Pushback. Seriously, that's the pushback to having a teacher that is trained to be able to take a bad guy out. That's your pushback. that somebody can take the teacher's gun. Get out of here.
So
Train them so that they
yeah.
don't allow their gun to get taken by the student. Get out of here. And then put snapshot reviews, the comment right after that one. So the latest incident that happened, police turned up armed to the T and waited an hour before they went in. Just because people have guns, it doesn't guarantee they will be safe. Really?
Okay, let me say a couple of things about
that's not an argument. You haven't said anything that means anything. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the police, so there's police and then there's police. Okay, in other words, different precincts, different cities, different states, different SWATs type situations. Okay, in other words, in this particular area, which happened I believe it was Texas, right? That's the school where it recently happened. Okay, and in the particular area, the cops that showed up, different units showed up, not knowing exactly what was going on. Okay, they didn't have, they knew it was an AR-15. They didn't have the vest, the kind of vest that you need to have. I'm not a technical specialist in this kind of thing, but they didn't have the kind of vest you need to have in order to stop AR-15 bullets. Okay, they don't know how many shooters. The fog of war is always present, and it's always easy after facts have been released to look at the facts and say, "Hey, you see, this, that kind of thing."
Yeah.
But look, if a team showed up there that knew what was going on with guns, okay, well, like what would it be? A team without guns would it be preferred? Okay.
Yeah.
So the point is,
let's do that. Let's do that. Let's
let them show up without guns, with full information, and then what? In other words, there are many other factors that have to do with how you stop a situation, but definitely not having guns is not going to help you. Right. So there's the fog of war always. And there's, personnel or coordinating and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how many teachers. I don't have the proof vest, blah, blah, blah. But of all those things going on, definitely taking away my gun is not going to help. Right.
Look,
so you should have guns. And then there's certain other things that have to fall in line. And if they don't fall in line, that's why you call it a tragedy. Right. The tragedy is a tragedy. Yeah, tragedies will happen.
So I'm reading another one of Snapshots, emails. I'm sorry, message, chat comments. Exactly. So this mentality of arm the teachers doesn't guarantee it will make any difference. Now,
hold on. Whoever says anything like guarantee, you're going to need to start super chatting if you're going to be talking this kind of stuff. Okay. You're going to need to pay. You're going to need to pay to get this much attention. But when you say something like guarantee, I don't know how old you are. I don't know where you're coming from, but Jesus Christ, nothing is guaranteed. Come on.
Yeah, it's like, dude. So, because it's not a guarantee, let's do nothing. We need the thing that's 100%. If guns are involved, then it has to be 100%. Okay, that's the principle here. So, and which is interesting because earlier in the chat, same person is saying, so do nothing and then just hope that things get better. No, we just suggested things to do that at least from a probability perspective, increase increase the probability that things will go better. No, nothing is 100%. We're talking about improving given the conditions that we're in. Okay. Given the actual structure of American society, the likelihood of different things transpiring, you're not getting rid of 300 million guns. So stop thinking about that. That's not going to happen. Okay. And even if you could come up with some sort of way to disincentivize people from buying guns, you still have the 300 million guns that already are out there. Okay. So you can pretend like a good solution would be for folks to show up with no weapons. Don't arm the teachers, arm them with information and training. Just let them go in there into the war zone with nothing. That's great. And then here's the other thing. Notice that they didn't say anything about the security guards, the armed security. Okay, so I didn't just say a single point of entry. I didn't just say metal detectors. I didn't just say armed teachers. I didn't just say armed security guards, everyone having the proper training. No one is forced to do anything. Teachers have to volunteer if they want to do this or not. And I think you'd be surprised that there would be a lot of teachers that would volunteer. Right. And so it's not so it's all of these things together. Okay. Oh goodness. And this
Okay,
is not
so
there is no such thing as a perfect solution.
of course,
There is
there's
no
only
perfect
trade-offs, right?
solution. We live in a fallen world. People get to make decisions and they get to do all kind of wild stuff. Do you ever wonder what prevents an oncoming car from just deciding, you know what, this is the day I'm taking everybody out, and just start
Yeah.
running on the other side of the highway? What are you going to do about that? Now nobody can drive cars. Okay, look, let's talk real stuff, not this phony,
Interesting
head in the
thing
clouds.
about that fact, by the way, the whole thing about, because sometimes you often wonder how we, as crazy as we are, drive on those lines.
Yeah.
And not just go crazy. Well, one thing is, the people that do that are not here anymore. Okay. And that's because that's the perfect skin in the game type situation whereby there's a complete symmetry in the risk, right? It's not the kind of situation where you do it and survive. Like, in other words, pilots that crash planes are not around anymore. Right? That kind of a thing.
Right.
But let's go back to the point that was made about the teacher taking the gun, because you addressed one aspect of it. No, sorry, the students taking the guns from the teacher. Yeah. The shooter taking the gun from the teacher is the aspect you addressed. There's another aspect of students now being in proximity to a gun, right? In other words, they're saying, okay, look, so let's take it back down now to the reasonable table, where we're saying, okay, fine, you can't tell me that a shooter is in there shooting people, and you're telling me that, hey, I shouldn't have a gun. In other words, I shouldn't have a gun to protect my family because, the robber can take it away from me. I think we all know. Yeah, let's let the robber come in and have their way with you and your family and do whatever they want, because possibly, they could take away your gun, so you just don't have it. Okay, that's fine. But how about the aspect of there were no guns in this area, okay? And the bad people whom are going to bring guns in, that's one thing. But how about the people you're now exposing to guns, okay? Is it inherently bad that that the kids are now exposed to guns? Is it tempting, perhaps, that they may want to do something about, maybe, some boy that's bored and whatever. It's like, hey, I wonder how I can get that gun there, right? What are those dangers? And how would you address that? Besides just saying good training, do you acknowledge that there may perhaps be an issue with bringing a gun into a situation? You already mentioned that you grew up in a place where the guns were loaded and unlocked in rural Ohio, okay? But we already kind of know where you're.
I grew up in Michigan, but yeah.
Oh, my bad.
But yeah. So, I mean, same kind of deal, though. Yeah.
Same kind of deal. So assuage the concerns of somebody that says, hey, there was no gun in here before. Now you're bringing in a gun. I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I just think that folks need to face reality. And reality is that we live in a free society, and in a free society, people do not have to follow the rules. Okay, in other words, if they decide they're going to follow not follow the rules, they don't just poof and disintegrate immediately. They're able to go and break the laws. They're able to go and kill a bunch of people. They're able to go and do all kinds of stuff. All right. And the only thing that you can do is you can protect yourself and people within your proximity. That's the only thing that we can do. And you've heard the expression, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Okay. And you certainly don't go in with well-meaning hopes and your head in the clouds. And you know what? I saw in the news that a kid got a gun from a teacher, so that shows that categorically that's a bad idea. Get out of here. That is because you can find one anecdotal piece of evidence that does not dismiss the veracity, the probability that what it is that I'm saying in our current climate, not in some magical fairy world, not in some other universe, not in some freaking alternate reality, but with the issues that we have, the history that we have. Okay, you, it's
Mhm.
like freak. And here's the other thing. I saw Rob Calico made a comment earlier. So no gun control is the answer? No. Again, with the hyperbole, there
Yeah,
already
you
are
started out
laws in
saying
the
that,
book.
yeah, that the laws, and then you mentioned gaps in the laws. You mentioned the wrong emphasis, such as talking about assault weapons, AR-15s, when you should be focusing on somewhere else. You
Oh,
talked about the
handguns.
fact that Dylan
If you're going to
Roof,
be,
for example,
yeah,
got the
yeah,
gun. Go
I
ahead.
want to know. I want to know why. I want to know why none of these freaking anti-gun zealots. I want to know why they never talk about handguns, because handguns are the things that are actually, that's what's actually causing most of the mayhem is
Hmm.
handguns. It's not so-called assault weapons. But I'll tell you, it's because it looks like a machine gun. It looks like an M16. The AR-15 looks like an M16. So then, when you have images of it, it makes it look like, oh, nobody needs that. Who needs what is it, a pistol grip, or whatever, and who needs a blacked out, you know, uh, shoulder stock. Who needs that on a weapon? I mean, how many bullets do you have to have in your gun? Do you really need that to hunt with? It turns into that kind of stuff, which is just total BS arguments. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah. Now you sound like me. Soon you're gonna call people some bitch ass niggas or something. That's another cuss from me. I think I get 4 per stream. All right.
Uh,
We have a number one enemy. We have Whitey on the stream. What's up, Audra? How are you doing?
Huh? Hey, I'm armed too. I mean,
That
I'm not a
complete.
not a
Yeah,
good enemy to have.
we already talked about you earlier coming to harass the former slaves. But anyways, let's start from the beginning here. I asked Dr. Thunder what his relationship with gun ownership is. You already kind of alluded to the fact that you're armed, so you do own guns. Were you raised with guns? What is your relationship with gun ownership from? What's the history there?
Yeah, so I'm a gun owner. I was raised in a rural setting, around guns. I wasn't someone who, was shooting a lot of guns from a really young age, but I was around them, and we understood we respected them, right? Um, the earliest thing that we all learned was, how to take care of a snake with a gun, rattlesnakes, and the shotgun behind the seat. That's sort of tier one, and then I went beyond that at a certain point once I did get into shooting, and I've gone so far as to be a more or less semi-professional competitive shooter, uh, particularly in the sport of three gun. So I even got to go to shoot shotguns in France a couple of years ago. So that was pretty cool. I actually took my gun to France and shot it there and got back and everything. That was a cool experience. But yeah, so I've got a lot of experience with firearms. I've also have a lot of experience with training for self-defense, both hand to hand as well as training people to shoot guns. Um, you know how to conceal carry training, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And then I also have some background in the study of and sort of advocacy for the Second Amendment, in a lot from different
You're
perspectives.
something of a politician, aren't you?
I prefer not to be, but I do occasionally have a weak moment and get mad enough to go engage in politics, and sometimes that, ends up putting me under the categorical umbrella of politician.
Okay, good.
I
Now, you
prefer to
definitely.
be a freelance advocate rather than I found that to suit me a bit more. But
Hmm. Now, let me ask you, since you have some expertise here, expertise, you have experience and you have expertise with training and whatnot. Some of the solutions that Dr. Thunder has put on the table. Okay, volunteer teachers, arm them. You have a single access point of entry into the school. You have armed guards and all these other kinds of things. And then you've seen some pushback. What are your thoughts on these in terms of the effectiveness, the kinds of ways in which these programs might be implemented from your experience as a trainer of armed personnel?
yeah, I have some good thoughts on it. I'll start with the sort of idea of hardening the building, right? Hardening the campus. Yeah, and there's a limit to how far you can go with that, and you're, as a lot of these issues are, you're on a line of you're restricting people who aren't criminals, right? Like the students, the teachers, in order to get to the sort of hardened campus level that really would, you know, have a high enough degree of preventativeness that you could sort of disregard other measures. I mean, you're looking at turning it into a prison, right? And that's not exactly, that's going to have some other effects, right, on the student population, right? Like you could even go, you could discuss that in terms of mental health, right? Like what effect does it have on the students if they are more or less being, sort of in an extremely, I mean, it's already that way to a certain extent, but if you increase that to where they're more and more restricted, and it's more and more of sort of a prison-like, extremely hardened campus type thing. I mean, that has effects other than just increasing
Is
sort of the
there a
defensibility
right way
of
of
the
doing that?
building.
I know we have a delay, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. But is there a right way of doing that? Because I mentioned, for example, if you're born in a stew in Africa where AK-47s is just around, that's not a problem. It's not going to affect your mental health. But it's a question of an acute change, right? So is there a way that you can imagine? Okay, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, of introducing these kinds of hardening or of hardening in a soft way or whatever, such that the mental effects are not so acute, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can balance it, right? Like I think there are degrees of hardening um, campus or whatever, a building that doesn't drastically, you know, that doesn't keep people from getting kids from getting to go outside, or doesn't make it so difficult to have like, events, right? Because like that's, like if it's too hard, then when you have a sporting event, right, and it's too hard for people to get in there to go watch the ball game, right? Like there's a lot of, it isn't like an entirely closed population, right? Like I think there are a lot of measures, just reasonable, and a lot of it has to do, I think, more with probably and probably more in the direction of surveillance of the campus, right?
Hmm.
Because if you know what's going on, right, maybe you don't have to necessarily have the doors locked all the time, but if you have the ability to keep an eye on, say, all of the sort of egresses,
Cameras.
and then go, oh, we've got issue over here, we can now shut, maybe you've got a double set of doors, so maybe you build those egresses, those main entrance exits, such that it's kind of an airlock thing. I mean, like there's I think there's design elements, right? You could do it in such a way so that you do have a lot of control over it, without it being sort of constantly all the time just shut down, and locked down. So I think there is, I think there is things that can be done in that direction. I think sometimes that I mean, but then you get into logistical, right? Like it's going to cost money. It's going to go, you can't just lock the doors that already exist. You may need to redesign the thresholds and the entryways to make them where they're not locked down but are defensible, right? There's a difference between something that's, you can make relatively defensible choices. I think there's more of that could be done without overly restricting day-to-day
Right.
operations or day-to-day sort of freedom of the students and teachers and visitors and so forth.
Right. And those would
Um,
be the ones
and then
that,
the other measure, when it comes to arming teachers, this is
okay.
go ahead.
Okay, we have a little bit of a delay, but let me just say this. In those sort of uh, those uh, those those ideas, those approaches to dealing with this issue, the ones that are not going to be totally like repressive to the students would be the ones that I would be interested in. It wouldn't necessarily be turning the campus into some sort of war zone, but I just think that there's a lot more stuff that we can do. And then I also think that if we're going to do these things, and here's where I think a one size fits all approach would actually be beneficial, because if you have certain schools that have all of these policies, they have surveillance and everything else, and then a bunch of schools that don't, these mass shooter folks, they're going to say, hey, well, I'm not going to go to this one that's armed, that's hard, to deal with. I'm going to go over this other one that doesn't have any of this surveillance. And that's one of the issues. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that becomes an issue with almost any measure, right? Is
Right.
logistically achieving some sort of equitable defensive, you know, defensibility is quite difficult. Um, but yeah, on the other issue that you mentioned, the idea of arming teachers, and I won't go too deep into this because you guys discussed a lot of the points and so forth. But one of the things that I think is often not brought up, right, is it's always, this conversation is always treated as if there are no teachers that are already trained in firearm use. There are no teachers who are concealed carry holders who have already sort of made the mental decision that they are willing to take responsibility for themselves and others and undergone the training, right? You know, I think one of the interesting things about the idea of allowing teachers to be armed, should they desire to be on a educational campus, is that it actually requires almost no investment or logistical change in a lot of cases, because you have a lot of adults, right, who are already trained, licensed to carry a weapon for defensive purposes, right? And what we have is we have these particular types of camp. We have this sort of rule where it's like, yeah, you're allowed. These adults are allowed to do this and be prepared to defend themselves and others everywhere else except here in this building, right? So just by saying, okay, you carry everywhere when you're not here, right? When you get out to your car, you put on a gun and you've already been through all this, right? Just there would be a lot of places where you would already have trained people who are used to carrying, who have already been through the mental choice of deciding that they're willing to take the responsibility of carrying a weapon to protect themselves and others, and just all you gotta do is now allow them to not be banned from engaging in that in this
Right.
one location, right, where they spend all day.
Right.
So I think that's an issue that isn't brought up enough, because it isn't something where you're starting from scratch, right? There's
Yep.
certainly going to be certain schools where you may be, but in a lot of cases you would just be removing the restriction again on these responsible adults, trained adults, and say, hey, you're no longer restricted from defending people at your day job, right? At the most vulnerable place you are all day, right? So I think that's an important point on that topic, and I think that is makes it one of the more viable, one of the more important things to discuss.
Yeah. One of the
Dr. Thunder,
issues.
go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah. One of the issues um, that I see is that there is this. So there's a difference between having a healthy respect in for guns, such that you're not doing, you're not treating it like a toy. You're treating it like it's a dangerous thing that can inflict harm. All of that. There's a difference between that and a sort of trembling kind of fear of guns. right? And I think what often is the case, and even folks that are friends of mine, associates of mine, where even having a discussion about guns, and if I was to tell them, yeah, I own a gun, or I'm going to get my concealed carry license, that, it's like they start acting like they're afraid or something. And it's like, it's just, I think that's honestly, I think that's part of the problem. Is I think folks have this like a trembling kind of fear, some folks, of just guns, period. And so they can't see why anyone would ever want to have that around them, X, Y, and Z. And so the real solution is just get rid of all of these guns. But again, you're not going to get rid of the guns. It is not possible, and it's enshrined in the Constitution that you're not going to get rid of the guns. So there's not really anything that you can do other than get yourself trained, get your concealed carry license, do the necessary steps to make sure that you go to the gun range frequently, do all the stuff that you need to do to maintain your skills so that you can protect yourself and other folks if that needs to happen. And
I want to ask
I've
you.
said this and she just seconded the motion, this whole idea of get rid of the gun-free zones, because that's a huge, that is just a huge issue, and I don't even know why we still have gun-free zones. That's like the dumbest thing in the world, especially if we're having all of these mass shootings. I heard somebody say we've had like 214 of them this year or something. I don't know what they're classifying as a mass shooting with that high of a number. But if that's the case, then why? Because usually folks that cite those kinds of stats, they'll also be the ones that also defend having, gun-free zones. So I don't know how you reconcile those two, but anyhow.
So starting with you, Dr. Thunder, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this, Audra. People talk about, we've talked about mental health. We talked about it generally, okay? But I want to talk about some of the other things that have to do with, let's say, radicalization, which you mentioned earlier, Dr. Thunder. You said, hey, it is easy now for people to get radicalized online and such. Prior to that, we talked about, not we in this case, but prior to that, there was the talk of desensitization via video games and all these other things. Maybe desensitization through movies and Instagram and hip hop, whatever it may be. So are these legitimate insofar as we're looking for solutions? Are these productive things to be looking at? To talk about desensitization, white supremacy, misogyny, incels, economic frustration, whatever it may be, right? Is it necessary to get this granular with regards to people's particular intentions and where these intentions may have stemmed from when trying to find solutions? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Thunder, and then Audra?
No, because the thing is that in a free society, you're allowed to be a weirdo. You're allowed to be, an incel. You're allowed to have different political view. You're allowed to, you can be a misogynist if you want to. You can be a misandrist if you want to. You can be, whatever you want to do. That's how it works in a free society. And yes, in the public square, they may say, okay, well, we're not going to deal with any, overt racist comments, and we're not going to deal with any, like this, and you can get canceled or whatever. Okay, whatever. But you can't, in a society where you're allowed to do all those things, pointing that out is no solution. Pointing that out and saying, hey, look at all this. This is what's causing this. No, actually, this is not really much of a connection. Okay. the biggest issue here is, yes, I think social media makes it easier to sort of radicalize folks, and to give them sort of ideas about how to create the most havoc and mayhem. You know, that is true. Yes, someone having, weapons that should not have weapons, either because they have a criminal record or because they couldn't pass a mental health, test. All of that kind of stuff. Yes, straw buying is a thing. Yeah, we need to crack down on straw buying when we can. And I cited an instance of one of these perps getting a weapon that should not have been able to get a weapon because their straw buyer got the weapon for them. That straw buyer is in jail now. So that's an example of actually enforcing laws. I think we can do a better job of that. Yeah, the video games are more graphic. We know all of that stuff is the case. But the general person is not going to run out and think that real life is like Grand Theft Auto. Okay. So the person has some sort of already some weird predisposition to certain behavior. Right. And in all of these situations, you're still talking about a microscopic percentage of the population. But that's all it takes. That's all it takes, right? And that's one of the costs of living in a free society. One of these years back at the institution I work at, it's a Big Ten university. There was an active shooter. It was a deal, on campus, and so this stuff is, it gets close to home, and honestly, it can be and is frightening to think that. I mean, I have an 8-year-old son. I don't want anything obviously to happen to my family. But I'm also, pragmatic and being realistic when I'm suggesting solutions for a lot of these issues, a lot of these gun-related issues, right? You're not going to just be able to just put something in place because you just hope hard enough and you wish hard enough. If you click your heels together, then then you can go back to Kansas. That's not the way this works. You have to operate within the current structures. And the fact is that the solutions that I suggested, when schools have implemented those protocols in churches, I've got a buddy, and it's a local church, and they have implemented those kinds of protocols where some of the congregants, they've made a security team, and they are surveilling when they're in service and stuff like that. Somebody's responsibility is to be walking around to check and making sure that there's no weird stuff going down. And you have to do that. You got kids in there. You got, protect the women and children, right? Look, this is what it is. This is what it is. So you can look at this for what it actually is, and then propose solutions that will actually do something to at least reduce the amount of these kinds of atrocities. Or again, you can use it as an opportunity to politicize, to get something that you wanted beforehand, something that you've been wanting anyway. You wanted gun control, you wanted X, Y, and Z. Here's your opportunity to start talking those same points.
To that point, I would even say that people who bring up, let's say, the boy issue, the issue of how boys are, shall we say, treated, and the riddling and whatnot, to be fair, that's also a sneaking in of some kind of a priori political consideration, right? You're like, okay,
Right.
mass shooting has happened, so now let's bring in my men's rights issues right to the table. Even all these things bear on the issue, shall we say, tangentially one way or the other. But the question is a question of priority. If we're not arming teachers or doing some of these kinds of uh, purely actually material, shall we say, solutions, then talking about these other things that are tangentially, ancillarily connected to the issue might be. You did mention something about family, though. You said that you were raised in a two-parent household. They're still together, and the guns were
Yep.
unlocked, and the guns were loaded. And perhaps
Yep.
that's an important aspect. Is if you have the man there in the boy's life, teaching him this, that, and the other, because typically it's men that are doing these things, right? And we understand that it's not a strange thing that it's men that are doing these things. And insofar as the father or male role models are outside of these boys' lives, that's an issue. Okay. But Audra, comment if you will, and we'll get back to the family thing and some of these other things, but comment if you will on this talking about incels and misogynists and economic frustration, white supremacy, or whatever it may be that people point to say, hey, you see, this shooting is a sign of the rising white supremacy or the rising this, that, or the other. And is it relevant at all to point to these things when trying to solve the problem?
I mean, I think number one, it's relevant in the fact that it points into the direction of the actual sort of problem component, which is the human, right? Like guns don't kill people, people do. Like there's truth to that, and so it's important to recognize that a disturbed individual in pretty much all these cases is part of the equation and is sort of the critical part of the equation, right? But as far as it being a particular indication of modern times, I mean, things come and go, but you can find examples 100 years ago, right? The Bath Massacre, still I think the deadliest school massacre in the U.S. history, right? And no guns involved, bombs, by the way, right? I always tell
Mhm.
people, I'm like, to be a very sort of devil's advocate, reality is that firearms, in most of these cases, a lot of these massacres would probably be much more deadly if the perpetrator chose to use something more catastrophic than
Fertilizer.
a firearm, right? Like
Yep.
yes,
Yep.
yes, they're painfully effective, right? They do end up killing people, but the actual efficiency of their deadliness, and by most of the people that use them in these cases, is not incredibly high. Um,
Hmm.
so, but yeah, it's not a new thing. Everybody points to these things, and there can be things that maybe exacerbate it for certain people. The ways in which some of these ideas get propagated may be different. Right, but the ideas, the type of disturbed individuals, those things existed, and we can show that before social media, right? Before all these things, before there was checks, before there was any rules on, back when you could order a gun out of a Sears catalog, right? Like it isn't something that's explicitly new. Um, so
Hmm.
I think a lot of those are red herrings, right? Like it's not that it's not worth discussing, but it's rarely, I think, a incredibly the determining part of the equation.
Right.
Hmm. So these things it's good to point out the human aspect. It is, after all, true, right? It is the truth, insofar as where it comes from. It's sourced from the truth, but perhaps not very relevant. It's good for psychological studies and a novel, and perhaps, to discussions of human pathology, but it's not necessarily going to stop or the killing. Okay,
Right.
kind of it's like studying the psychology of terrorists and trying to figure out why they hate you. It's not
Right.
Right.
really going to stop them from hating you and killing you and whatnot. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, okay, we have been going for about an hour and a half. We're going to start winding down and landing. It was a quick 1 hour and a half, super quick, by the way, and a
Mm.
very nice and active conversation. Uh, uh, by the way, okay, there's still time for you to super chat. By the way, also, there's time for you to share the video, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bells and all that stuff, okay? And become a member. For those of you whom are already, as a matter of fact, all you moderators out there with wrenches and stuff, consider becoming a member of the channel, okay? You guys have been listening and enjoying the content. Yeah, yes. I'm talking to you, D and Falcon Black. Yes, all of you. All right, so we've addressed things that have to do with what are the legitimate reasons to own a gun, right? We talked about the cultural aspect, the rural culture, the hunting, the ranching, and whatnot. We talk about the fact that it is important for self-defense. And so far, I don't think anyone is pushing back against that. We talked about the deterrent against government tyranny, and Dr. Thunder had his opportunity to kind of say, okay, well, maybe that's not such a big deal, but it will be difficult to, it does make the government's work a little bit, if the government decide to go full tyrannical, it will make their work a little bit more frustrating, right? But I want Audra now to address that particular aspect. People talk about, well, our rights are here, the whole militia thing, and a deterrent to government tyranny, and we're going to defend ourselves against the government. Now, I see that mostly as a symbolic thing, and I'm down with the symbol of the gun, right? But is there what kind of credence lies in there? The point of, deterring the government from coming to take you over by having guns. Your New Mexican internet. Go ahead, Dr. Thunder.
Yeah. And shout out to D with the big $50
there's always
super chat.
people do put out the arguments. It's like, well, you might not win.
Audra, 1 second. Let's address the super chats, and then we'll go. Like the delay got a little crazy.
Am I better? I shut my
yeah, you're better now. So young men, boys need fathers in their lives. Yeah, it's facts.
And Dr. Thunder is a new member. Look at that. Look at that. Okay.
That's right.
Doug.
Is my mic?
Doug, I'm on Patreon instead of channel.
Is my audio coming through now?
For the payment date set by Patreon.
Just checking.
All right. Okay, Audra, you can go ahead right now. Go ahead. Talk about the fact that people are saying the guns are there to protect you from government tyranny. Shoot.
That's a long delay.
Yeah, that's insane. But
the simple answer is I think yes. Like it is relevant and it is true and it is important. It's a difficult thing for everybody to understand and sort of contemplate, because it's not something that you want it to never actually come to a head, right? Am I coming through all right?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
My sound working? It says I have signal. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. The delay is about like 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Yeah. It's like a 30-second delay.
Okay.
Why don't you have her drop down? And
I thought there was. All right. But yeah. So it is.
All right. So, I did want to say something while we're waiting for Audra to get back, and she's adding a lot of value to the stream today. Thank you, Audra, for coming up. I did want to say something about one of Rob's comments earlier. He said something about I wanted stuff to say the same. This is my America, which is an interesting thing to say to a Black American man. I'm not sure how any aspect of this is my America. You never said that. Well, we can go back in the chat and see that it was either you or perhaps it was either Rob or it was Snapshots review.
What does the comment what does the comment mean? I'm sorry, can you explain the whole My America thing?
Well,
like, what does that mean?
Well, the idea was basically my arguments are basically supporting the idea of status quo, and this is my America. I'm happy that things are the way that they are, X, Y, and Z. And if I'm misciting the quote from earlier, I tried to go back and find it exactly, but I should have responded to it right away, but I didn't. But it was one of the two said that. And my thing is, I'm not sure how any aspect of any of this stuff is my America. It seems to, at least insinuate that I or people like me have somehow been in control.
You're God, apparently.
Yeah. Well, not even just God. I'm not even a white guy, right? So you can't even claim right. You can't even claim the patriarchy, against me. Let the patriarchy and and men like me and all like this. You can't even do that. So, yeah, I'm just trying to present solutions that I think will actually protect people, prevent a lot of this kind of foolishness from happening, especially at the sort of regularity that it is. And so, yeah. So I don't know how this is my America, but all right.
Audra, you are back. You mind continuing from where you left off with regards to government tyranny?
All right, yeah. So as I recall, I was saying, that it is something you don't want to test, but I mean, it's important. You mentioned it was symbolic. I think that is true. It's important to be reminded that the structure of our government, as it was designed and set up, is that the more centralized, enforcement, element is intended to be answerable to the citizenry, right? Like that is intentional, and that we need to remember that in order to remember to call, to to bring it up when things start getting a little bit too much the other direction. And then from a practical, realistic standpoint, again, I've heard people make the arguments like, oh, but you'll lose. Like, yes, but it will not be, maybe, right? Like yes, there can be some issues with power differential, right? It's like if the federal government decided to just nuke everybody that didn't, that resisted, if it came to that, right? Like, okay, sure, but then what do they have left, right? Like if there's not much of a country left past that point, so then in that case it's an everybody loses, right? I think that a absolute, I think that's part of the thing, is that it even if it isn't an outright automatic victory or a fair fight, it's enough of a problem, right? Like it's just like if you decided to start confiscating guns tomorrow, there would be, well, I always tell people, are like, you think who would win? I'm like, doesn't matter, there would be blood, right? Like, and that's a big deal, right? It would be a pretty, people don't want that, right? Like it would not be settled peacefully if suddenly, agents started knocking on people's doors and saying, hand over your guns or else. So I think it is incredibly relevant, and I do think it is the foundational, sort of most base principle, reason for the Second Amendment, and I think intentionally so. Everything else follows from that. It establishes the right to protect yourself from criminals and or the government, right? Like that idea that you have the right to the ability to protect yourself, right, and your family and so forth is extremely fundamental.
So the truth is, any kind of hypothetical will always be subdued by the reality of what you have in front of you. If people are getting shot by guns, and then you say, well, hypothetically, guns are going to protect us from the government, people will push back against that. But then you're going to build up on other things about, well, I think that the Second Amendment and the protection of myself as a human being and taking on that responsibility for freedom, okay, is which is the experiment that is going on here, is worthwhile. And in other words, you're going to have to posit that and take that stance, and it's not no longer a question of this tit for tat thing. But the other aspect of the whole people have guns is the realities they do, and you're not going to take them away, right? And I think that's been the aspect that Dr. Thunder has been kind of harping on, which is his solutions are based on the facts as they are now, not as you would wish they were. Perhaps you don't like the way things are set up, and that's fine. You don't have, I mean, come on, why should you? I mean, it's, any kind of random arrangements of things can be liked or disliked by anyone for a number of reasons, right? But sometimes you have to deal, well, most of the times you have to deal with things the way they are, especially when you're trying to solve a problem, right? When I'm trying to solve a problem in engineering, I don't go saying, well, I will be able to build a better situation if you just had, some more, if you had infinite budget and a few more acres of land, and if steel became magically, it's like, no.
Yeah,
I
you
have to
just
deal with the
always
laws of
built on
physics.
bedrock every time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If we just drilled all the way down to bedrock every time, I guarantee you. Okay. So, but you don't have infinite budget, and you don't have blah 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 blah. So you're gonna have to deal with it, and then and the laws of physics also restrict you. That's why it's not easy to build elevators to space and stuff like that. But Audra, what are your closing thoughts with regards to this very important topic? Okay. And we don't take the topic lightly. We're not taking it lightly at all. And that's why I mentioned that there have been 27 mass shootings, the way one particular way of defining mass shootings is there's 27. Okay. And 2 have been recently publicized. And we get back to the whole gun violence, gun law conversation. What are the legitimate reasons for having guns? And what are the reasons why these mass shootings are happening? And what can be some of the solutions? And we went through some of them, and the whole point here was for us to kind of dispel some of these things. For example, the whole thing about, well, the incels and the misogyny and the this and the that. It's like, well, sure, you're pointing to the human aspect, but we already knew that. Okay, we already knew that it's human beings that are doing this. And then we got down to brass tacks about, for example, arming teachers voluntarily. We kind of brushed through some of those and clarified them, elucidated them, and talked about the fact that you have to relieve the rural people to do their rural stuff. Hence, these solutions are going to have to be localized. However, some of them need to be centralized in order to create, as you say, equitable, create some kind of equal playing field so that people aren't just hopping to the weak spots. So you have to be centralized with some solutions, decentralized with other solutions, and whatnot. Okay, just my attempt to summarizing the kinds of things that we've discussed. But closing thoughts on this topic, Audra.
Yeah, you led me in there pretty good to my kind of final thoughts. One final thought is that, we did get to brass tacks, or at least, somewhere close to them. Got a little deeper into some of the facts and realities of some of this, and I think that's critical in any attempt to suss out possible solutions, and or finding where the actual problems lie, right? Like, so much of this conversation happens in a lot of venues at a sort of fantastical level, in sound bites and bumper sticker level, that doesn't get to realities and really dig down to these things, because reality is what we're dealing with here, right? Any solution has to be looked at in terms of reality. And along with that, I think sort of my last thing I want to leave as a takeaway is the idea that we need to, we have to ask the question, sort of, where do the problems lie, where do the solutions lie, and not assume, sort of the things we're fed, right? Like, okay, guns are part of the equation, but I think too often we automatically zoom in on that, for or against, right? We zoom in on sort of the things we're used to debating, and these hot sort of hot spots in the equation. And for me, like, when contemplating possible solutions, the nature of the solution that one thinks would be appropriate is relevant, and again, I think it's often not enough of the conversation. And I think questions need to be asked, such as, what do we think a solution is going to look like? Where do we think it's going to be? Is it a matter of prevention, right? Like, is that feasible, right? And that's, I think sometimes prevention would be great, but again, I think sometimes prevention, you know, it can get into the fantastical, right? It's like we just cross our fingers and hope. And I think then that takes away sometimes from maybe where a solution lies is in protection, right? And that's where some of these things like arming teachers, right? Like those are addressing issues like this, right? In particular, if we're talking about these school shootings at different points in the chain, right? And that needs to be part of the conversation, right? Like they're not the same thing, and protection may be where there's more room to improve than prevention, right? So that's kind of that's my final thought on it is so I think that needs to be more part of the conversation, right? I mean, me personally, I think probably the prevention point there is pretty, like, we, you know, statistically, like, a lot of shootings don't happen, right? There's millions of guns that don't shoot anyone every day, right? There's millions of people that don't shoot anyone with guns. But again, the protection aspect, right? How do we protect against these bad apples when all the things go, when all the equation goes wrong, right? And it gets to that point where you've got a hostile assailant. I think there's more room and more discussion to be had in the, you know, how can we be better protect ourselves when that happens? Because it's impossible to completely prevent all of these sorts of situations from happening.
100%, 100%. And thank you very much, Audra, for dropping in at very short notice. Very much appreciated. Contributed quite a lot to the conversation based on your experience, your expertise, and whatnot. Okay, so Dr. Thunder, okay, you heard what she had to say, you know, here regarding, hey, this is a complex issues, and we understand how people are. People want to debate. We want to go for or against. People want to look at the various chains. People don't want to say, okay, Dr. Thunder, I'm going to continue to lobby to take away your guns. But meanwhile, maybe I'm going to work with you in terms of protection of, which just seems like a smart thing to do. Like, you know, but, you know, people are not smart, are they, Dr. Thunder? What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, you know, and, you know, I didn't want this to sort of devolve into a back and forth between me and a couple other folks in the chat. And I definitely did not and do not intend to straw man your arguments or speak on things that you weren't referring to. So that being said, and I certainly am, you know, somebody claimed that I was name calling or something. I don't recall that, but I might have said something about
that was probably me. Or you told somebody to get out or something, but that's not name calling.
Yeah. But I did say something about what a leftist gun control zealots or something.
Zealots, the zealots.
I did say that, but that actually wasn't necessary. That wasn't necessarily specific to any one particular person. It's just a particular approach to dealing with these, you know, gun rights kinds of issues.
Rob, I want you to pay attention to what's going on right now, because this is perfect modeling of how things should be. Okay, not that he's agreeing with you or anything like that, but it's basically having said things, admitting in real time, right here, the stream is not over. Okay, saying, hey, I didn't intend for this or that to happen, and blah blah blah. I didn't go ad hominem, such and such. Even though they didn't, you know, call you your mama, whatever. But hey, I didn't mean to call you a zealot. And I think, Rob, you must admit, okay, that that's pretty good stuff. This is modeling the ways in which conversations should take place with respect and so on. Anyways, go ahead, Dr. Thunder.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, I mean, and you know, if my intent is not being received, then, you know, can't do anything about that. But I did want to say that I will double down on my point with respect to solutions that are actually possible given the parameters that we're working within. And I or anyone else may have significant differences with the way that things actually are. Okay, that's fine. But while giving a solution, if the solution is actually going to be possible, it has to address reality. Okay, and it has to address the reality of circumstances. I just hear a lot of these same sort of arguments over and over, but what is claimed is that somehow those arguments, which are not based on anything realistic, those are the real arguments, whereas those are the real solutions, whereas solutions that are taking into account the history of this country, the actual laws that are on the books, and trying to use that as a particular framework to come up with solutions that actually could move the needle in a particular direction. Those are the ones that are not, that are not going to do anything, or those are the ones that are, problematic or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I just find that disingenuous. But yeah, good show. It's a spicy topic. I don't expect folks to agree. And frankly, without some folks that had different positions, different perspectives, it wouldn't have been nearly as probably entertaining. But again, Rob, I did not intend to, was not trying to single you out. Actually, the energy I was coming with was really for the arguments, not for the person. Always is
gun control
protocol.
Zealots, unless you put yourself in that category, does not refer to any one particular person, right? So if I come like those crazy liberal, whatever, those crazy conservative this or those, like, if you don't put yourself in there, that's fine. We all understand rhetoric, right? So on Wednesday, getting ish done, right? Okay, this Wednesday coming up.
A new day for that show.
It's a new day, okay? And the same time, which is 9:30 Eastern time, 6:30 Pacific time on this channel. We're going to be continuing our conversation on tips for productivity, okay? We got 10 tips talking about how you can get things out of your head, put them down in the system so that your brain can be freed up for coming up with ideas, for you have that bandwidth for creativity, and so these things are less stressful, while at the same time you're actually getting more and more things done, okay? Because productivity is key, efficiency and effectiveness and whatnot. And also Thunder's thoughts you're going to be having on your channel this Thursday, right?
That's right. There was a recent Dr. Ronald Neal was recently on, what's the name of that show? I can't think of it now, but it's a black media, and it's one of the sort of national media sources. It was a panel discussion. It was about the sort of Kevin Samuels effect or impact, and there were a couple folks that were more sort of pro Kevin Samuels, and then there were two that were pretty hard Kevin Samuels haters on the panel, and there was also a moderator, and I am likely going to do something on that exchange, because I thought that there were it was relatively short exchange, but I think there was some good stuff to comment on. So probably going to do something on a subject like that for this coming Thursday.
All right, all right, all right. And again, we'll be back here next Sunday on your channel. Okay. And I'm not gonna be around. Okay. Or I don't know, maybe I'll be able to pull some kind of miraculous thing, but I will be somewhere between here and Turkey, and here being West Africa, and Turkey is in Turkey, and San Francisco. So I'll be somewhere in between these parts. So we shall see if I'm able to be present for next week's Case Closed. But as usual, it's going to be fire. It's going to be great. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the chat, having a nice spirited conversation that is solution oriented. Okay. And until next time, we are what, Dr. Thunder? We're gone.
We're
out. Peace.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what was behind the curtain, the face of evil lurking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons will breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising and hearts are compromising, convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest and the righteous in your corners.